Welcome. I'm Matthew Phelps, co-author of the Turning to God's Word Bible study, In the Beginning, the Book of Genesis. Today we'll be talking about lesson 23 of our study, which covers the book of Genesis, chapters 38 and 39. In this lesson, we cover two topics. The first being the lineage of Judah, and the second being next steps for Joseph. This Judah thing is the first case in a while of one of these genealogy things not being about getting rid of somebody and not talking about them anymore. Because we're definitely going to talk about Judah and his children later. So this is not getting rid of that. So why is it in here? We're not going to get, in this lesson, overly into the sex stuff part of this. It's there and people talk about it, and there's definitely, if you want to get into high level, just to address it, sexual act requires unitive and a procreative good, and has both aspects and needs to allow for both things for it to be good. And when you cut off one of those goods, as Onan does here, then you are not appropriately acting, and that is sinful. There's a lot more that people go into around this in different contexts and down different roads, but for the sake of what we're doing here, that's it, right? Inappropriately applied sexual act. Can't do that. Bad. Beyond that, Judah's not a lot better from the sex point of view, and we see Judah in general comes off in this story kind of badly. The point is also not to make Judah come off badly. There's the really interesting thing. And if you read, and you should, the papal quote in the lesson, it talks about this fascinating idea that in the genealogy of Jesus, in the Gospel according to Matthew, it mentions 4 women in Jesus' background before his mother, and they are 4 women who are foreigners, and the first of those is Tamar, and all of them are neat and are worth looking at. We're bringing this up here not because of Judah, but because of Tamar. It's important that we married this foreigner, but she is much more upstanding and honorable than Judah is, and behaves much better, very consistently behaves much better. Judah does several things that are pretty appalling. So our takeaway is the line of Judah continues on from here, but it's the line of Judah and it's the line of Tamar, and that is a relevant and a noteworthy thing. So that's why we're talking about this. That's why it's here. And eventually, of course, from the line of Judah comes the line of David and the line of Jesus. So this line ends up being very important. And by the time all of this was being assembled, some people think that was around the time of David. So we could be putting special emphasis on that line back then because it had relevance when we were combining all of this into the form that we have it now. Or it was done before that and it was a little more prophetic, and either way, it's important because of the line that it's in. So that's what that's all about. We'll go through it, but the big deal is highlighting Tamar and the contrast with Judah. And where is the goodness of this line coming from in that regard? You have Judah, who's a jerk, and you have Tamar, who's great, and their kids are going to be eventually getting to very good line. Where does the greatness in that line come from? And this becomes why this matters in the genealogy of Jesus, by the way. You can have someone from the outside come in and participate in producing offspring and have that positively contribute to offspring that are credited to and get brought into another line and have that be good, right? If the father of a child is God, who can possibly come in and give birth to that child? It's going to be someone from outside, but the someone from outside can bring good things into that line and into that child. Where it matters is all four of those women are types of our Blessed Mother and show an important truth about how can anyone be the mother of God. So that's really what we're setting up. And we'll go through the story, but honestly, I just kind of stole all its thunder. But we'll go through it. It's an interesting story. Judah doesn't come off well, Tamar does. Then second part that we get into is the beginning of Joseph's time in Egypt. And this is where we see that blessing kick in, which is real interesting because we haven't seen the blessing manifesting the same way with the other kids, but it also hasn't been like explicitly passed on to Joseph the way it was passed on to Jacob. God is intervening here in the state that Joseph is in to take care of him. And the way that, and what that intervention looks like is like that blessing kicking in big time for Joseph here while he is in Egypt. We're going to see a pattern of things going very favorably for Joseph and him thriving, and that being ascribed by everyone to his worship and service of God, the God of the Hebrews, the God of Israel, but we're not calling it that quite yet. And everybody is going to see, know, and recognize that, and it's going to be a big deal, and that blessing from Joseph will eventually extend to his family. We're getting ahead of ourselves with that, though. But for now, Joseph is the heir apparent in terms of that patriarchal blessing. And since we're already talking about the genealogy of Jesus, there is another interesting implication where from Jesus' father's side instead of his mother's side. So the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob or Israel. And you can tell they are because they have that blessing. So you could fairly place Joseph as a fourth patriarch, even if he's the 11th son. Because you see that he gets that blessing that marks this is the guy in this generation, right? So you've got four, then after Joseph, it doesn't pass to his children. But Jesus' paternal father, and this lesson also shows how that adoption into a family by birth happens, right? Like Tamar is seeking to have the children of her first husband with the other men, right? Like that's a thing that can happen. So Mary's married to Joseph, so Jesus is Joseph's son, even if he's not, right? And Joseph, Jesus, then human adoptive father, is Joseph, the son of Jacob, which implicitly, by naming convention at least, Joseph, or Jacob, Joseph, Jesus, also positions Jesus neatly in something that looks very much like the line of the patriarchs. And, Joseph, Jacob's father, Joseph, Jesus' adoptive father, also has a knack for interpreting dreams. So it's not, which Joseph will do, our Joseph here will do more, right? So you can see that as a reach, but there's a lot of interesting family stuff going on here, and we're kind of setting Joseph up in that line of the other patriarchs, and kind of setting up Jesus' father's side from that, and setting up Jesus' mother's side from the Tamar thing. So a lot of Jesus family stuff going on here. Bunch of family drama here. Important point. Judah marries a Canaanite and has 3 children. Onan, and Shelah. When they get older, Judah finds for his oldest son, another Canaanite woman, Tamar. And they get married. And is not a good guy and displeases the Lord, and the Lord kills him. And then, as is that custom, this is weird to us, but it was the thing you did back then. You want to continue the line of who had a wife, and is not there anymore. So the idea is then his younger brother, Onan, is meant to lie with Tamar so that she can have a child, so that that child gets counted as and line continues. And then Onan separately gets married and has his children, and they're in his line, and you continue both lines. I know to us that doesn't make any sense, but that is the legality of how that worked. And you could continue a family that wasn't yours. So Judah asks Onan to do his duty in that regard. And Onan doesn't refuse the offer of, you can read it, we don't need to talk about it. He does not perform entirely the duty that he was asked to do in a way that is also displeasing to the Lord, and the Lord kills Onan. Judah looks at this and says, the problem is this woman and not my children being out of line with God, which is an incorrect view from Judah's part. But Tamar rightly says, I have a claim to your 3rd son now. But Judah is worried that it's Tamar's fault that his kids are dying and not their fault for being bad. So there is this tension, but Judah's trying to put off what he knows he's supposed to do with his 3rd son, Shelah, and leave Tamar as a widow without that recourse. So that's where we're at, is Judah has 2 dead sons, 1 left living, the younger. Tamar has a legal claim to have a child by that son, but Judah has decided that would be perilous for that son, and is not a giant fan of that. Here, seeing that Judah has no intention of making good on his duty and his obligation and providing his son Shelah, who's now grown, Tamar takes matters into her own hands. She hides her face and dresses up like a harlot along a road that Judah is meant to go along. Judah demonstrates maybe he's not such a great guy either, and maybe his kids got that from somewhere. He has no problem availing himself of the services of a harlot, but he doesn't with him have money to pay for the service. So Tamar cleverly says, what'll you give me for the service? Oh, something you don't have with you? Just leave as a pledge things that are personally identifying of you, And then, when you send me the sheep or the goat, then I'll give you your stuff back. And that'll be, how you can pay me later for the service. So Judah agrees and then has intercourse with who he believes is a harlot, but who is his daughter-in-law. And then he leaves his staff and signet, which are personally identifying things, with him, so that when he sends the payment, he'll get them back. But she disappears in the meantime. After the fact, Judah leaves these things that are personally identifying of him with Tamar, that he doesn't know is Tamar, that he thinks is a harlot, until he can send payment. And then once he leaves, she takes off too, because she doesn't want the payment, right? What she wanted was to have a child. And she has gotten her chance at that. And she is clever enough to understand that it's going to be very important that she be able to prove what happened and how. Which is why, as we'll see, she needed the personally identifying stuff. What happens here is she is masterfully outsmarting Judah, who's not well motivated and demonstrating propensities toward not good behavior that she can take advantage of and get him to do right by her in some form. I kind of alluded to this already, but when they come back to exchange the payment for the personally identifying items, she's not there. And then they do a whole thing like, where's the harlot? Oh, there's no harlot here. And then he's embarrassed and he decides not to do a big search, because going around asking everybody, have you seen the harlot or my personally identifying stuff that I left with the harlot, is probably bad publicity and maybe embarrassing. A thing he did not think about when he was comfortable sleeping with a harlot. But heaven forbid everybody find out about it. So he decides to just leave it be and doesn't look for her more. So 3 months later, when Tamar is far enough along to begin to show, people figure out that she is pregnant. And since she is a widow and doesn't have a husband, they decide she's a harlot. And Judah, hearing that, says, oh, harlots, those are bad. We need to burn her. Even though, as we know, he engaged with a harlot himself, and he's not likewise offering to be burned. Just stand-up guy, Judah, through all of this story. But then she very helpfully comes out and produces that personally identifying stuff and says, whatever I did, you made me do. Here we are. And finally, at least, he says, okay, you know what? She's right. I'm wrong. I was not doing what I was supposed to. Let's not burn her. And we'll just leave this alone. Just so magnanimous of him. But there we are, and she is with child, and Judah is going to have another son, and it will be attributed to the line of because that's the legal thing, but it will also be that Judah's is where we're at. Then we see that Tamar has twins, and we see this thing that is, kind of reminiscent by now of, for example, the story of Jacob and Esau and twins fighting for position. And we see one hand comes out, or foot, and they tie a cord around it, hand, to mark it's the first, but then the other son comes out first. That one's Perez, and then after that comes Zerah. And in this case, Perez is the line that continues on to Jesus and to David. And that is our dive into a little bit of this genealogy. We talked in the intro about this is important because of the line that it is. And then it goes down through Judah. There is, if you're interested in following a lot of this, there is a tree with more of that genealogy also on page 149 in the lesson. And we've established that. But this is one we're establishing not because it's cut off, but because of how important it is. And we've talked already about it's important that it's establishing specifically Tamar. In the compare and contrast, Tamar comes out way better than Judah. And that's showing us you can have women, foreign women, come into the family in a way that's good. They don't all have to be bad. But of course, probably the implication for part of the reason Judah's sons are bad is that he married a Canaanite, but also he's bad. So how could they know any different? So actually bringing in someone with integrity probably helps correct the course of how that family was otherwise going. So Tamar ends up mattering more to the development of that family line than Judah does. So as we left Joseph, he was being dragged off as a slave to Egypt. What we would think that is going toward is pretty miserable life of servitude. Where we find Joseph is in the house of a captain of Pharaoh's guard, Poti-phar. And Joseph is thriving in that environment. He has done well and has continued to see advancement to the point that he is running Potiphar's household. And Poti-phar is attributing that success to Joseph's God, which is a fascinating thing to see, right? Joseph is doing well, and even these pagans around are saying there's something different about this guy, and it's his God, which means he is worshiping his God, and he's talking about it. And he's not just trying to blend in and saying, oh yeah, Ra, he's really good. And he's not being opportunistic and getting stuck there in Egypt and saying, well, I guess I'm Egyptian now, and I'm going to worship Egyptian gods, which could have been a detriment to him, right? He could have presumed that he could fit in better if he adopted Egyptian worship practices, and he has refused. He has stayed on the pathway of I am serving God. And as he has done so, he has greatly prospered. And of course, we know the two are very closely connected, right? And everybody sees it. And everybody thinks, wow, this is something special. And he's getting treated very well, considering he is, of course, still a slave. Here we introduce a piece of information because it's relevant that hasn't been before, which is Joseph is both handsome and good looking. He's really hot, right? Like, you're using two adjectives that mean the same thing. This is a very good looking guy. And that leads him to a problem where Potiphar's wife sees that and thinks, I would like to sleep with him, and tries to abuse her position of power, being married to the master of the house, to make that happen. But Joseph, being a good guy, possibly in contrast to his brother Judah, whom we were just talking about, says, nope, I can't do that. This guy has treated me really well. And I am not going to do that to him, and it's also a sin against God if I do that. I will not sleep with you. So good job, Joseph. But now we have an awkward situation. So then one day she gets more aggressive. Seeing that nobody's around, she tries more forcefully to impose herself on Joseph, who gets away, but in getting away leaves behind his garment. And at that point, she decides, if this isn't going to go, then now I'm in a bad spot because my husband won't like it if that's happening. I've got to get ahead of the narrative on this one. So she accuses him of impropriety to the people in the house, and she has his garment to suggest that something happened. And she starts to raise that fuss. Then Poti-phar gets home. She tells him the same story. She still has the garment. He does not do due diligence. He doesn't ask Joseph's side of things. He believes his wife and says, yeah, no, I'm over this guy. Jail, straight to jail. And so Joseph, who had everything going well for him, because he did the right thing instead of the wrong thing, has all of that ripped away and is now back in a terrible situation again, or so you would think. But then, as is becoming Joseph's pattern, he gets thrown into jail. Everyone likes him, and he gets put in charge of the place. It's true that good-looking people have an easier time in life than people who aren't good-looking, but not that much easier. He's also extremely competent at apparently everything that he could possibly be asked to do. Very personable and good at forming positive relationships with people. This is an incredibly talented guy, right? Like, clearly his skill set was wasted tending sheep and having dreams about wanting better. Of course he's dreaming about better things. He's better than tending sheep all day. He was wasted in his family's situation, but also his dreams were from God. And the really interesting thing about this is he attributes all of this all the way to God and doesn't lose his faith or his relationship with God through all of this. So Joseph is a great guy and is going through some hardships because of that, but is seeing God always having his back as well. This has been an overview of Lesson 23 of the Turning to God's Word Bible Study, in the beginning, the book of Genesis. For more information, consult our written study and visit us online at turningtogodsword.com.